Welcome back, little soldiers. It is I, Mr. George Washington. Now, you'll remember that I was back at my home in Mount Vernon, but I didn't get to stay there for very long, and we're going to find out why today. But first, I want you to think about me, George Washington. Say my name, George Washington. Good job. Now, I want you to write along with me on your little whiteboard as many things as you can think of as George Washington. So I'm going to circle my name, and we're going to bubble out as many things as you can think of about me. So what's one thing that you can think of? Maybe you remember that I fought the British. Yes, I did. What's something else? Go ahead and pause and write one. Maybe you came up with something like, I was Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Yes, I was, Mr. George Washington. Now, what do I call myself? It's not Mr. George Washington. It's what? General, right. General Washington. I was a general in the Continental Army. What else can you think of about me? I led troops to victory at Yorktown. My wife's name was Martha, my dear Martha. And I loved my home, Mount Vernon. Those are just a few things about me. There were many more. What did you come up with? Send me a picture and send Miss Darcy a picture on homeroom. I'd love to see what you came up with about George Washington as well. Today's lesson is called A Young Nation is Born. What nation are we talking about? Our nation, right? The United States of America. For the first few years after the Revolutionary War ended, the former British colonies could not seem to agree on anything. They had not yet come up with a name for themselves. Some said they should be called the Union of States. That sounds pretty good. Others liked the sound of the American nation. Others simply wanted to call themselves by the names of the states in which they lived. Virginians if they lived in Virginia, New Yorkers if they lived in New York, and so on. There was no plan for how they would be governed or ruled, so lots of different people were making up lots of different rules. States were taxing one another unfairly, just like the British had done before the war. What a big mess! George Washington was enjoying life at Mount Vernon with his wife, their children, and grandchildren. At 57, he felt he had served his country well as a commander-in-chief, and he was not looking for any more jobs away from his farm. But 4 years after returning home from the Revolution, Washington was called to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for another big meeting. He joined many of the same men with whom he had worked in the Continental Congress at the beginning of the war. These men are called our Founding Fathers, or simply Founders, because they helped found or start our new country. Benjamin Franklin, now 81 years old, was the oldest representative there. George Washington was elected president of the convention or meeting. It was called the Constitutional Convention because the men were writing a constitution, a plan for how the new nation could live together peacefully. Do you know who this guy is? Who is that? That's Thomas Jefferson. Stop arguing, George Washington told the men. We have an important job to do. It was hard work. They met for 4 long, hot months from May to September. The men continued to argue. Some walked out, but most of them stayed until they came up with a good plan, or constitution. Their hard work paid off. The rules they wrote that summer, more than 200 years ago, are the ones we still use today. And when our founding fathers left Philadelphia that September, our country had a new name. Before we talk about what the new name was, who were our founding fathers? So when we talk about the founding fathers, we're talking about George Washington, thank you very much, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson. And who was Thomas Jefferson, or what was Thomas Jefferson the author of? The Declaration of Independence. Very good. We the people of the United States, they wrote. From then on, the 13 former British colonies were called the United States of America. Ooh, I like that name. One thing the representatives discussed that summer was their need for a leader. They decided that a president chosen by the people to serve for only a few years would be better than a king who was not elected and served for his entire lifetime. And guess who they wanted to lead them? Who do you think? Who? You got it. Me. You guessed it, George Washington. Once again, he had wanted to settle down at Mount Vernon, but once again, he had been called to serve his country. In 1789, when George Washington left his home in Virginia to become the first president of the United States of America, he had no idea what he was going to do. As the president of the new country, he knew that his presidency would set an example for all future presidents. While president, Washington stayed very busy. He helped organize a permanent national army and navy and set up a national banking system. So if something is permanent, it means that it is lasting. It will not go away. Today, our country still has a permanent national army and navy. He worked hard on plans for a city that would be our nation's capital. A capital city is the city where leaders gather to govern the entire country. The word capital can also mean an uppercase letter, right? Don't forget your capitals. But in this case, we're talking about the capital of our country. George Washington personally chose the capital site along the Potomac River on land that is between Maryland and Virginia. This capital city would not be in any state, so no state could say that it was in charge of the country. The capital city was designed to have a house in which the president and his family would live. Do you know what that house is called? It would also have many government buildings. George Washington was no longer president when the capital city was finally built, but the city was named in his honor. It was called Washington, D.C. So Washington, D.C. is the nation's capital, and it was named after me, Mr. George Washington. Thank you very much. And D.C., so D, the letter D stands for district, and C stands for Columbia. And what was that house that they built for the president to live in? The White House. After serving as president of the United States for 8 years, George Washington packed up and headed home to Virginia. Finally. He died at Mount Vernon at the end of 1799, about 2.5 years later. A patriot, a founder of our nation, a military commander, and our first president, Washington had rightly been called the father of our country. Many places have been named for him. Monuments and statues have been built in his honor. You can even find his picture on our money, both on a paper bill and on a coin. What coin is Washington on? And notice this is his silhouette, like you guys did yesterday. This is the quarter. A quarter of a dollar is 1/4 of a dollar, so it would be 25 cents. And it's also on the dollar, so it's on our probably two of the most used pieces of money in our country. I mean, pretty proud of myself for being on there. All right. So what is George Washington called? He's called the what? The father of our country. And why do you think he's called the father? Tell me, why do you think we call him the father of our country? Think about it. Tell somebody why you think he's the father of our country. Then get out your core folder. All right, soldiers, in your core folder today, and Miss Darcy didn't give me one, so I can't show you. Don't look, this is for tomorrow. But in your core folder, you should have a round piece of blue paper, and then you should have a packet with a George Washington, that the first page looks like this. Each page is round, and you are going to make a little booklet about George Washington. So how the booklet's going to look, you're going to cut out the pages all round. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe if you start cutting them all together, you'll mess it up because they're not all back to back. So make sure to cut the first one out first, and then the next ones I think you can cut all together. But you're going to put the George Washington front page, glue that on the front of your blue piece of paper. On the inside, you'll have all of your pieces of paper stapled with the back blue as your back piece of your book. So you have a little booklet. See that? I think it's blue. Did I give you blue or red? I can't remember, but whatever color you have, there's your booklet. You can color this silver or gray, and you can color your pages to make it super pretty, and then read it to your study buddy, or read it to a parent, or read it to anybody you'd like. But this is an awesome little booklet for you to make. All about myself, Mr. George Washington. All right, little soldiers, I will see you tomorrow. I believe I'm going to teach you about Benjamin Franklin tomorrow, but we'll have to wait and see. Goodbye, and so long.